By the year 628 CE, the conflict between Muhammad and the Quraysh of Mecca had been raging for 6 years. The Muslims of Medina had endured brutal battles, devastating losses, and hard-won victories. Yet, despite these struggles, Muhammad's ultimate goal remained unfulfilled: the peaceful return to his birthplace, Mecca, to perform the sacred pilgrimage, the Umrah. The Kaaba, the sacred sanctuary of Islam, remained under the control of the Quraysh, and though it was originally built as a house of worship dedicated to the one true God, it had become filled with idols of pagan gods worshipped by the Meccans. Muhammad sought to reclaim the Kaaba for monotheism and prove to his followers that Islam would one day triumph. In the 6th year of the Hijrah, Muhammad took a bold step that would alter the course of history, not through battle, but through diplomacy. Rather than march into Mecca with weapons drawn, he gathered 1,400 of his followers, donned the garments of pilgrimage, and set out from Medina in the state of ritual purity. This was a clear signal to the Meccans that their intent was peaceful. Muhammad knew that an outright military conquest at this point would be costly and possibly disastrous. A diplomatic resolution, if successful, could cement his authority in Arabia without the loss of life. As soon as word reached the Quraysh, they were filled with suspicion. They saw Muhammad's growing power as a direct threat to their dominance. Despite his insistence on peace, the Quraysh refused to believe that the Muslims were coming only for pilgrimage. In their minds, this could be a ruse, an attempt to march into Mecca unopposed and take control of the city. Determined to prevent Muhammad and his followers from entering, they sent out scouts and cavalry to block his path near a small settlement called Hudaybiyyah, on the outskirts of Mecca. Rather than push forward and risk bloodshed, Muhammad chose to negotiate. He understood that his growing movement could not afford another costly battle so soon after the conflicts at Badr, Uhud, and the Trench. Instead of a military confrontation, he sent envoys to the Quraysh, seeking permission to enter Mecca peacefully and complete the pilgrimage. Tensions were high. The Quraysh, remembering past battles against Muhammad's forces, feared that letting him into Mecca could weaken their control over the city. Negotiations dragged on for days. At one point, Muhammad sent Uthman ibn Affan, one of his closest companions, into Mecca to reason with the Quraysh leaders. However, Uthman did not return immediately, and rumors spread among the Muslims that he had been killed by the Meccans. This triggered a crisis. Believing they were now at war, Muhammad gathered his followers under a tree and took what would become known as the Bay'at al-Ridwan, the Pledge of Satisfaction. They vowed to fight to the last man in defense of Uthman and their right to worship freely. This display of unwavering commitment rattled the Quraysh, who soon realized that Uthman was still alive. They decided that further hostilities would not be in their favor and finally agreed to negotiate a treaty with Muhammad. The terms of the Treaty of Hudaybiyyah were not what many of Muhammad's followers had hoped for. At first glance, they appeared humiliating. Muhammad and his followers would not be allowed to enter Mecca that year, but could return for pilgrimage the following year. A 10-year truce was agreed upon between the Muslims and the Quraysh, temporarily ending hostilities. Any Meccan who defected to Medina without their guardian's permission would be returned to Mecca, while any Muslim who left Medina for Mecca would not be returned. The tribes of Arabia were free to align with either the Muslims or the Quraysh. To many of Muhammad's followers, the terms felt like a betrayal. Some, including the formidable warrior Umar ibn al-Khattab, were outraged. They had fought and sacrificed for years, and now it seemed they had agreed to bow before their enemies. How could the Muslims, who had struggled so hard to establish their position, accept such an unfavorable deal? But Muhammad saw beyond the immediate grievances. He understood that the Quraysh had, for the first time, acknowledged him as an equal. The truce, though seemingly a setback, granted the Muslims something they had never had before: legitimacy. It was the first official recognition of the Islamic State by the Quraysh. marking a turning point in their struggle. While it appeared that the Muslims had conceded to the Quraysh, the Treaty of Hudaybiyyah soon proved to be one of Muhammad's most brilliant strategic victories. With hostilities paused, Islam was able to spread rapidly across Arabia. The truce allowed time for diplomacy, alliances, and conversions that would have been impossible in times of war. More tribes began to accept Islam, recognizing Muhammad's influence. Within 2 years, the number of Muslims in the Arabian Peninsula had grown exponentially. Additionally, the Quraysh had unknowingly given Muhammad an advantage. The agreement's flexibility allowed the Muslims to gain more allies while Mecca's power weakened. Many Meccan leaders, once staunch opponents of Islam, now found themselves forced to acknowledge Muhammad's position as an equal. By the time the Quraysh realized their mistake, it was too late to undo it. Less than 2 years after the treaty was signed, its fragile peace was shattered. A Quraysh-aligned tribe, the Banu Bakr, launched an unexpected attack against an allied tribe of the Muslims, violating the very terms that had held hostilities at bay. This betrayal sent shockwaves through the Arabian Peninsula, erasing the illusion of stability that had lingered since the agreement was signed. Reports of the violence quickly reached Medina, where the Muslims saw the attack not just as an isolated conflict, but as an outright violation of the peace they had painstakingly negotiated. The Quraysh leadership, now recognizing Muhammad's growing power and influence, found themselves in a precarious position. They had underestimated the rapid expansion of Islam, and now, with the treaty broken, they feared an inevitable retaliation. Desperate to maintain control of Mecca, they attempted to reopen negotiations. But Muhammad saw this as the final betrayal. The very foundation of the agreement had been shattered, and the time for diplomacy was over. The treaty had served its purpose. In the years since Hudaybiyyah, Islam had not only endured but thrived, gaining followers, allies, and unprecedented strength. Muhammad now had the justification he needed to act decisively. The conquest of Mecca was no longer a distant ambition. It had become an unstoppable reality, a moment that would redefine the course of history. What had begun as a seemingly humiliating compromise had transformed into one of Muhammad's greatest strategic victories. The Treaty of Hudaybiyyah, though controversial at first, had given the Muslims time to grow, spread their influence, and position themselves for the eventual conquest of Mecca. What had once seemed impossible, the peaceful entry into Mecca, was now within reach, not through war, but through patience, wisdom, and political maneuvering. In the next episode, we follow Muhammad as he leads his forces to one of the most pivotal battles in his campaign, the Conquest of Khaybar, where the last Jewish stronghold in Arabia would fall, further cementing the dominance of Islam in the region.